that's already given us so much information and pause for thought. But I'm going to turn to Sultan next, who's going to, I think, pick up your themes and extend them into his range. So, Sultan.
First of all, I would like to extend my heartfelt thanks to BAR England and my colleagues joining here. It's an absolute pleasure to be able to speak before you. I think my colleague Jaman has set an excellent context with much details about the human rights situation, and I would say partly the rule of law and democracy in Bangladesh. I wanted to talk about my own personal experience on the rule of law situation in the country. I mean, having involved in research and in advocacy and activism, I have plenty of experience myself, just to share with the audience. So I'd like to start by saying that Bangladesh is like ranked 124th out of 139 countries ranked by the World Justice Project in the Rule of Law Index. So the audience can have a sense of where the country actually is situated. Is nearly at the bottom. And in 2018, I was working for Bragg University as an assistant professor and also as a senior research associate. And I had the opportunity to work in the democracy and governance cluster before I joined MST. And I attempted to create a composite index on democratic governance, and just to look at the indices of the rule of law and democracy in Bangladesh. And I think it was an ambitious and bold attempt. We are moving away from the World Bank's Kaufman Index, and we are trying to create an index based on empirical evidence. We conducted like 3 national surveys for that, more than 200 variables. So I would be excited to just share some of my experience working on that project, and then I'll move to my Amnesty experience of how that went on. So we looked at actually 3-dimension primarily. One is the rule of law. The second dimension is accountability and transparency of the government, and third dimension is the democratic participation. And Zaman, I think, has basically illustrated what the rule of law situation is in the country. We basically looked at, based on the participants' experiences, based on our survey, whether the law has been applied equally to everyone. I mean, so we asked our participants that, have you been treated fairly, and have you been discriminated on the same standard? And our respondents was quite unequivocal that in many cases, and anyone has a hint of Bangladesh knows that the laws are not applied equally across all people. So if you are connected to the regime, if you have the muscle, political muscle, either rank and file, or you are a supporter within the elites of the regime, you get advantageous treatments before the administrative court system or the judiciary or the government services, and etc., etc. So there is a sense that if you are close to the regime, you will get preferential treatment across all domain of public life. And my personal experience has also suggests that, especially I think in many Bangladeshi people are struggling at the lower court, and I think Zaman can briefly touched on that, how people and also Shahanur work in the lower judiciary, so he can speak more from his own experience how people have the access issues, like there are number of barriers in accessing the justice system. So in no way the equality before law is a standard in Bangladeshi rule of law system. And there is a popular notion that it's not rule of law, it's a rule by law. I mean, law is applied preferentially in order for the ruling elites to maintain the control over the society. It's not the rule of law, and they consider themselves above the law. And we have number of public incidents. We saw that the sons of members of parliaments, they got preferential treatment despite demonstrating violence in public. Specific incidents are that at least in 2 cases, very widely publicized cases, that the sons of 2 members of parliaments, one hit and killed a pedestrian, but still got away with the killing. And then in one case, a son of a famous member of parliament in Dhaka publicly assaulted a military officials, and they didn't get enough punishment. So I would say the rule of law situation is quite dismal and preferential. The second that I mentioned, I would like to talk about that the accountability and transparency of the government. So when we talk about the accountability, and for my own index also, I looked at 2 areas, like one set of institutions within the government, which we call horizontal accountability institutions, like the Judiciary, Anti-Corruption Commission, Human Rights Commission, Comptroller and Auditor Generals, how these public institutions hold the government accountable, whether they are able to do their job and actually in effect can hold the government officials accountable for the malfeasance or wrongdoings. And then second set of institutions, the vertical accountability mechanisms, like institutions outside the government, to what extent they are able to hold the government accountable, like the media and civil society or organizations, whether they're able to operate and work freely without fear or favor to hold the government accountable. And we conduct surveys, expert surveys within all institutions. We looked at the data of the public institutions, and unfortunately, that I would say, with very few exceptions, overwhelming majority of the public institutions, the democratic institutions which are supposed to hold these public officials accountable, barely work, including among all the parliament, which is, as Zaman briefly mentioned, has become like a rubber stamp, also not representative since 2014. So parliamentary democratic accountability does not work because the parliament barely represents the people. In 2014, explicitly that more than 50% of the parliamentary seats were elected, quote unquote, uncontested, because I contest the claim that they were uncontested. They were actually stolen, because when the main opposition party decided not to take part in the elections, the government or the candidates affiliated with the regime, they forced other independent candidates to withdraw, um, either under duress or by paying bribes and etc. So they forced more than 153 out of 300 constituencies. They forced them out of elections, and they won uncontested. So you see how the nature of democratic accountability, I mean, the primary institution parliaments are working. So once the representation is gone, we can barely talk about how the parliamentary committees are working to hold the government officials accountable. And then if you go down a bit, we have the anti-corruption commissions and human rights commissions. And we see categorically how these institutions, instead of holding the public officials or wrongdoers accountable, they have been abused to actually punish opposition candidates, opposition politicians. So they have become, instead of being independent institutions operating within the government to hold the government accountable, they have become the long arm of the executive branch, and have been used by the head of the government, I would say, because in Bangladesh, everything has been personalized in the name of her, by the prime minister to I would say, implicate opposition candidates and politicians in the corruption charges. So all these institutions, unfortunately, have lost any semblance of independence, and they have not been, as we say in political science, that they have not been impersonal institutions. So in a democracy, if an institution has to be effective, they has to develop their institutional impersonal character, that they have to treat every citizen equally, and they don't see them based on their political preference or ideological preference or ethnicity or color, creed. But unfortunately, that's not the case. So the accountability in the horizontal plane is quite personal, political tool. And in the vertical mechanism, I would say the only ray of hope is that the civil society has been, I mean, since the restoration of democracy in Bangladesh in 1991, civil society has been one of the promising cases. And I would say still it retains some sort of independent voice within the society, but we have seen over the last 10 years a very systematic attempt to suppress civil society voices. The government abused law. Yes, Ashwini. Time? Yes, so I'll
Just
finish in 2
wrap it
minutes.
up, Sultan,
Yeah.
because I don't want to stop you really, because what you're saying is so interesting. But I'll come back to you. I know that. So just if you want to make your last few
I'll
points, then we
finish
can
in
leave
2
our-
minutes. Is that okay?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. So the government has abused law to suppress civil society institutions, and both legal, I would say, both legal and extrajudicial measures. So what law is that? NGO, I mean, they use the NGO bureau as an institutions, and they use the registration process, the licensing processes, just to stifle the funding of the NGOs, the civil society organizations. And we also saw intimidation, like sending police, detective branch people. And we have a very known case that the leading human rights organizations of the country, Odhikar, the government suspended their license, they froze their bank accounts, and they have sent police to the other human rights organization, as we know, ASK, so they have, I mean, they try to create a climate of fear, so that people are afraid of their life and live over poverty before they can be able to speak for people, I mean, freedom. And in terms of media, the other important institutions of the vertical accountability mechanism, we have seen a mushroom growth of number of media. So the people may really get confused that there are so many media houses blooming, but the actual freedom of operation, it shrunk, because overwhelming majority, it's 90% of the media houses are owned by the government cronies. So the systematically expanded the media just to give a false sense that there is a free freedom, but they are controlled by the people associated, either directly associated with the regime or the regime people itself themselves. And I'll stop here, because when we have chance, I'll talk about the democratic participation that I mentioned.
Yes, I appreciate you haven't gone through your research fully, but I have to say that was
Thank you.
Not just bleak, but chilling to hear what you have to say. And it's obviously the tip of the iceberg, what both of you have just said. And I'm anticipating it's not going to get any better when we turn to Shahanur, who's going to give us his personal experiences also of operating within this system. So if we can turn to you, Shahanur.